The death of Majorian left Ricimer in effective control of the Roman Empire. He decided to install a new puppet emperor through which he could exercise control, settling on an unassuming man named Livius Severus, whom he had elevated by the Senate in 461. But just because Ricimer said so did not mean that this guy really was the emperor of Rome. The governor of Gaul, Hydatius, certainly did not think so, nor did Marcellinus in Dalmatia. Both revolted against Ricimer's authority, leaving the puppet Livius Severus in control of nothing else but Italy. The barbarian peoples reconquered all of their old territory after the death of Majorian. The Goths again swarmed Hispania, and the Burgundians made aggressive moves into southern France once again. During the reign of Severus, Italy was ravaged by the raids of the Vandals. The empire had no fleet to fight off the raiders, who disembarked and pillaged the countryside before sailing away with incredible swiftness. Ricimer was the real power behind the throne, but he showed no interest in campaigning, neglecting to reassemble the Roman army into a meaningful fighting force. In 465, Livius Severus died, having done literally nothing. There was a succession crisis in the aftermath. Gaiseric and Ricimer had a preferred candidate, a man named Olybrius. But the Eastern Emperor Leo I eventually had his way, promoting a senator named Anthemius and sending him to the west. With the support of Marcellinus, Anthemius marched into Rome in 467 and was declared emperor. Ricimer, who could not risk war with the Eastern Empire, accepted the new emperor and married Anthemius's daughter. With the rulers of the Western and Eastern empires on good terms, Leo decided to solve Rome's most troublesome problem: the Vandals. He organized an unprecedented campaign to destroy Gaiseric's kingdom. The fleet was mostly constructed in the ports of the eastern cities, but the West made major contributions to the land forces that were to land in Africa. In total, there were perhaps 100,000 soldiers and sailors taking part in the expedition. In 468, this massive fleet set sail. Suffice it to say that disaster struck at the Battle of Cape Bon. As the Romans were attempting to land, Vandal fire ships fell upon their position and threw their fleet into chaos. The Vandal ships then swept in and sunk much of the Roman fleet, killing tens of thousands of Roman soldiers. The expedition retreated in disarray, having suffered a defeat of catastrophic proportions. This defeat was the end of the Western Empire's hopes of existing in any form. After the final failure of collaboration between the East and West, the Eastern emperors abandoned the West as a lost cause, and at that point its days were numbered. The Western treasury was out of money, the Western army was now missing thousands of soldiers, and the Vandals remained a terror on the seas. Anthemius did attempt some campaigns against the Goths in 470. However, the Goths had become too powerful. When the Romans crossed into regions of Gaul that were occupied by the Goths, the Roman army was outmaneuvered and completely destroyed by Gothic forces. Ricimer, who had moved to northern Italy with a separate army of foreign federate soldiers, maintained a separate center of power. In 472, after relations broke down with Anthemius, Ricimer called upon the Burgundians, who were ruled by a friendly king named Gundobad, to help him overthrow the emperor. they marched into Italy, and together with Ricimer's forces, they overwhelmed Anthemius' soldiers on the outskirts of Rome. The emperor was captured and beheaded. Ricimer had Olybrius promoted as his puppet emperor in July. He had no time to enjoy his power, though, dying just a month later. The puppet Olybrius also died in late 472. With Ricimer gone, his ally Gundobad became the supreme authority in the West, elevating a man named Glycerius in 473. He only reigned for a year, though, because Leo again sent a favored candidate named Julius Nepos with an army, and Glycerius was forced to abdicate in 474. Nepos, after a brief reign, was forced to flee Italy when the general Orestes revolted, placing his son Romulus Augustulus on the throne. Nepos fled to Dalmatia, where he continued to rule as the emperor recognized by the East. A year later, in 476, another general named Odoacer launched his own revolt, killing Orestes and seizing control of Italy's military forces. Finally looking to break the endless cycle, Odoacer decided that he would not rule through a puppet emperor. He sent a proposal to Leo, offering to rule Italy as the official agent of imperial authority. Romulus Augustulus was formally deposed on the 4th of September of the year 476, putting an end to the reign of emperors in the West. To tie up some loose ends, Julius Nepos continued to rule in Dalmatia until 480, when he was assassinated. The territories in northern Gaul held out until 486, under a king named Syagrius. After that, imperial authority in the West was truly gone. So that's when the fall of the West ended. But when did it start? Why did it happen? How did it happen? Could it have been prevented? So many questions. Let's try to answer some of those questions. When did it start? Well, I'm honestly not sure. There are plenty of dates we could choose, but my answer is somewhere during the 3rd century. Before the crisis, the empire was unified and stable and relatively unaffected by foreign invasions. During the crisis, foreign peoples broke across the frontiers and began disrupting the Roman economy by destroying farmland, ruining trade, and forcing people to adapt to a violent and unstable world. All of this eroded the complex Roman economy. Currency became worthless, the volume of trade and exchange collapsed, and the unified Roman world increasingly splintered into separate centers of power. While the 4th century was a respite, thanks to the decline in foreign invasions, the issues that started plaguing Rome during the 3rd century never really went away, and they all returned during the 5th century to bring the West down. Why did it happen? That's a significantly more difficult question to answer, so I think it'll help just to discuss some of Rome's problems. First, the splintering of central authority. This wasn't really a problem in those days that Rome had peace, because there was never more than one major military threat at a time. When Marcus Aurelius spent a decade fighting the Marcomanni, there was not a single revolt against his rule, because his absence from the rest of the empire was not an issue. Once multiple threats started facing the empire during the crisis period, the inadequacies of central authorities became obvious when the emperors repeatedly failed to defend all threats to the empire properly. Thus, many regions became more autonomous out of necessity, looking for their own defense. This happened on a large scale, as with the Gallic and Palmyrene empires forming their own armies, and on a small scale, with dozens of small towns and cities investing vast sums in constructing walls. Second, the rise of foreign threats. The wave of foreign invasions during the crisis was bad, but it did not succeed in bringing down the Roman West, and it was dwarfed by the wave of migrations that came in full force during the 5th century. Hundreds of thousands of people sought new land to settle on and saw the rich Roman world as a healthy target. The Roman Empire had systems to integrate migrating peoples, but under such stress by so many people for so many years, these systems collapsed, and the peoples forced their way in. Third, the decline of the economy. Even during the reign of the 5 good emperors, the silver purity of Roman coins was declining. This was due to a massive trade imbalance with China, India, and the rest of the East. Massive deposits of Roman coins have been found in India and Asia, and even Japan. The same cannot be said of Chinese coins in the Mediterranean. For centuries, precious metals were being sucked out of the Mediterranean region, debasing the Roman coinage and harming the Roman economy. More important than the loss of precious metals, though, was the destruction of the interconnected Roman economy. This economy, with the Mediterranean serving as a superhighway, allowed an unprecedented volume of goods to flow to and from previously disconnected regions of the world. And the whole Roman world benefited from access to goods, services, and ideas from thousands of miles away. Once violent threats came across the frontiers, trade over long distances became far more dangerous and far less frequent, breaking down the complex economic connections that sustained the Roman world. Each of these problems made the other problems worse. It was a vicious cycle that eventually led the Roman Empire to circle the drain to its doom. And while the Eastern Empire was strong enough to survive, the Western Empire was not. As I have hopefully shown, the deposition of the last emperor was merely a recognition of a reality that had already long been in place. An imperial regime that had been powerless for years, an empire that had been economically moribund for decades, a Roman world that had been falling apart for centuries.